6.5 looks at inequality, which is one of the biggest downsides of the free market, because there is no limit to the amount of resources that people can acquire. And so what we run into is that you have the small percentage of wealthy elite, and then you kind of have everyone else. That there's a huge disproportion of wealth in free markets compared to your more centrally controlled economics, where everyone's kind of more on an even scale because the government's going to control wage and income and all that more. Here, you're free to get as rich as you want to be because it's up to you to have private ownership of the resources. That's what creates the inequality. So it says in 2003, the average American made $66,000 and some change. But that's the average. It's not showing the distribution of, you have these people are here that make a ton of money, and then you got these people down here that don't make hardly any. So the way we measure this is with a graph called the Lorenz curve. The only thing that people typically remember about this after it's said and done is it looks like a banana. But it measures how disproportionate the wealth is in the country. And so you're going to have an equal distribution line that cuts straight through the graph, showing that if all of the percentages were the same, meaning that the top 20% of income controlled 20% of the wealth, if 80% of the people controlled 80% of the wealth, then it would be an equal distribution. The actual Lorenz curve shows the unequal distribution of wealth. And so example being that instead of it being, 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%, 20% for each of these groups, now 20%, the bottom 20% only control 5% of the income. Whereas, the richest 20% of people control 45% of the income. So this 20% of people controls 9 times more income than this group of people. Does that make sense? How these are split up? Okay. So, if we were to graph that, this is your equal distribution line right there, cutting through. That if it was, 20%, 40%, 60%, that percent of people earn that, you would be on that line right there. But this is your Lorenz curve. So it shows that, this 20% of people only control 5% of the wealth there. That, this next 20% of people put together only control 30% of the income. Here, 60% controls, maybe 45%. 80% of people control, 62%, whatever that is. And then you've got the 100th percentile out here, which controls a major distribution of the wealth. And so it's just showing this 20% of people, well, really, this 20% of people control all that wealth, where that 20% only control that much. Unequal distribution. But once again, when you graph it and you color it yellow, it looks like a banana. That's the easier way to remember what the Lorenz curve is. I've never seen an example where you have to draw this, but they may give you a multiple choice question where they give you a Lorenz curve and some numbers, and you've got to answer questions, based on the different percentages and things like that. So, but that's all it's showing, is that this would be perfect equality where everyone is equal. Here is where the distribution of wealth actually is for whatever country this is. And so Gini coefficient is another measure. This really doesn't come up either, but if you divided area A by the area B, and they would have to give you these numbers in order to do this. Like, you're not going to have to do the calculus to figure out the areas. That goes way beyond the scope of what entry-level econ is going to ask you to do. And so if they wanted you to calculate this Gini coefficient, they would have to give you the areas to divide, which at that point I don't know why they would, because that's a math skill and not an econ skill. But anyways, you get my point. If it were to ask you a question, that's what it's referring to, but it's not really going to come up. But a higher number means more inequality, a lower number means less inequality. Obviously, if it's equal to 1, then it's perfectly equal equality. But they would probably just give you the numbers and say, make a determination of whether this is high inequality or low inequality based on what that number is. But more likely than anything, they're going to give you the graph and then, ask you what percent of people have this percent of income distribution. Government transfer payments. So this would actually be like stimulus payments that came out in COVID, that the government's going to pump money into the economy to try to get this Lorenz curve back to this equality line. Or, in simplicity's sake, the government's trying to get the banana smaller, because the closer we get to this line, then the less disproportionate wealth. The further we get, or I guess the closer we get to this, then the less we have wealthy elite and then everyone else. And so that's the goal of the government, is to try to make it more even so we don't have this disproportion. All right, types of taxes real quick. Once again, this is multiple choice questions, but progressive tax is what we currently have here, meaning that as you make more money, you're going to be taxed at a higher rate for those larger amounts of income. And so we can go into what tax brackets look like later if that's just something you want to know, if we have time. But progressive tax, just know, as you make more money, you're going to pay a higher percentage. Proportional is typically a flat tax. If we said everyone pays 10% of their income for their federal tax return, that would be a flat tax. And then regressive means people who make less income are actually taxed at a higher rate. Sales tax works as this, because if we say sales tax is 7.5%, I don't know what it actually is, but that 7.5%, let's say 7.5 cents per dollar, is going to have a greater effect on a person with lower income than someone with a higher income. So that sales tax is going to take a greater proportion of a lower income person's income than it does a higher income person.
But wouldn't that be still flat because everybody has to pay that 9%?
No, because if you pay 9% tax and you only make $30,000 a year, that 9% tax is going to have more of an effect on you. Whereas, or let's just say you buy something that costs $100 and pay $7 in tax. Well, that $7 in tax is going to have a greater effect on someone who only makes $30,000 a year than that $7 does on someone that makes $200,000 a year. And so that would be the regressive side of it, is the effect that it has. Not the actual amount, but the effect that it has on who's paying that tax. And we'll get through some of these. Great news.
Aww.
You're done with micro.
Yeah.
Yay.